and one says X happened and the other says Y happened, and you know your kids, how do you assess that situation?
I look at the past history of my kids and generally how I know their behavior is. Try to understand the situation leading up to a conflict.
Okay. So kind of gathering more information,
Yes.
would that be fair to say?
Yes.
And what if other people saw that same incident? Would you go to other people and ask them their opinion about what happened?
Yes, I would try to get all of the information that I could and
Okay.
make the best decision after that.
Fair enough. Can you think of a situation, again, in your personal or professional life where you were 100% certain you were right and you later learned that you were wrong?
Yes.
Okay. And how do you deal with that? I mean, what's your kind of response to that?
I typically go back to the person that I wronged and explained that I was wrong.
Okay. And do you try to apply that lesson to future behavior, or do you just kind of go, no big deal, I was wrong?
No, I always try to learn from it.
Okay. Ultimately, again, your job as a juror is to analyze this evidence, to hear the evidence, to analyze it, only the evidence that you hear in this courtroom. And at the conclusion of the case, the judge will give you the law that applies to the case. And you have to decide. You're what's called a judge of the facts. What happened, right? Let's assume you get this sheet of, this is the law, these are the instructions we have to follow. And you read the law and you go, that can't possibly be right, or I think this law should be different. I've got a reason, a personal belief that this law should be different. Can you follow the law as the judge instructs you, even if you think the judge is wrong, or you think the law should be changed?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to just follow up with some of your questions and how you responded to the questionnaire. Again, we understand that this was national and international news before you received this questionnaire, and that you've been exposed to some information. And thank you for taking the time to fill this out. But I wanted to ask you a question about, there's lots of references to like a video that was made in this case. And you watch the news or the nightly news from time to time, correct?
Yeah, pretty rarely that I watch it, but yeah.
Okay. And well, there's a video that became public, and there's actually several videos that became public. You said that you've never seen any video of the arrest of Mr. Floyd?
No.
Okay, not even little snippets or clips on the news?
No, I saw a picture,
Okay.
but I did not watch the video.
Okay. So when you've watched the news, you may have seen like a still frame photograph that appears to be taken from a video kind of a thing?
Yes.
Okay. But never went and sought out or looked up this video of this arrest?
No.
Okay. But you have had conversations with friends and family members. Have your friends or family members described to you what they saw in this video?
No, not really describing it, just, no, actually not describing it.
Okay. But just maybe generally talking about it, right?
Saying that they'd seen it, and kind of the general news story that he was arrested and held on the ground and had a knee on him.
Okay.
Yeah.
You had heard in your explanation, you had heard some information about past incidents involving Mr. Floyd as well?
Yes.
All right. And you understand that Mr. Floyd's not on trial here, right?
I do.
Okay. And ultimately, you may or may not hear about previous involvement or previous incidents involving Mr. Floyd or Mr. Chauvin, right? But let's assume you don't hear any of that. Can you set what you may have learned aside and, again, assess this case based on the evidence presented in court?
Yes.
Okay. And you had heard about 2 separate autopsies that you thought were performed. You wrote that you heard one coroner's report said Mr. Floyd died as a result of asphyxiation. Another said it was due to drugs in his system.
Yes.
Okay. And again, you'll listen to various testimony throughout the course of the case, and if those issues never come up in this case, can you set aside what you thought you had heard or read and judge the case based on the evidence as it's presented in court?
Yes.
You were asked some general impressions about both Mr. Chauvin as well as Mr. Floyd. With respect to Mr. Chauvin, you had a neutral opinion, and you wrote, I haven't heard or read or seen much of anything about the defendant. And with respect to Mr. Floyd, you checked both neutral and somewhat negative, and then wrote somewhere in between these, and you wrote, I am bothered by the fact that Mr. Floyd, and then you reference a prior incident or allegation involving him. But you also understood that he had served some sort of penalty or something like that. So,
Yes.
okay. Again, it's okay. Everybody forms their own opinions, right? And your opinions are as valid as mine or anyone else's. Can you set aside any opinions you may have formed about Mr. Floyd? And again, only analyze this case based on the evidence as presented in court.
Yes.
You were asked a question. The question reads, do you believe your community has been negatively or positively affected by any of the protests that have taken place in the Twin Cities area since George Floyd's death? And you wrote, I believe it has been negatively damaged.
Yes.
Can you explain why you think that?
Well, obviously the physical damage to the city, and seems like there's more crime than there was before. The reputation of the city seems to have taken a hit.
Okay. And can you see any positive things that have come out of the protests?
I can't say that I'm aware of any positive things that have come out of it.
Okay.
It seems pretty negative right now.
Sure. Certainly the sort of the mood of the city has changed, right?
Yes.
One of your sons went to one of the protests, though, right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have a conversation with him about why he did that? You know.
Yes.
Okay. Do you agree there's a difference between a protest and a riot?
Yes.
Okay. Fairly self-explanatory, right?
Yes.
So the protests versus the riots, right? I think everyone would agree the riots had left a bad feeling. Mm-hmm. But what about the protests, the peaceful protests?
What's the question?
Well, I mean, is there anything positive that
Oh.
comes from peaceful protests?
I think there can be, sure.
Okay. Do you associate the rioting with the protests?
To some extent, I do.
Okay. Do you think that everyone who protested rioted?
No, I don't.
Okay. Did your son riot?
No, he did not.
He protested, right?
He did.
And so if you were a juror on this case, I mean, obviously your son may have a different perspective, like on the protest part of this, at least. I don't know you, I don't know your son, and I don't know what you've talked about. But if you were a juror in this case, and you ultimately rendered a not guilty verdict, could you go to your son and explain why you did that?
I could.
Okay. Would your vote be influenced because you didn't want to disappoint your son?
No.
You've had your car broken into and your son's car was stolen in the past,
Yes.
and you had to call the police.
Yes.
You indicated that you were satisfied with their response,
Yes.
or very satisfied, I should say.
Yes.
So it's fair to say you have a pretty strong respect for law enforcement and things of that nature.
I do.
Okay. And obviously, this case involves a whole lot of police, right?
Yes.
Mr. Chauvin being a police officer, police officers investigating this case, police officers will testify in this case. You were asked a question, and I'm going to circle back into all of that. You were asked a question that because law enforcement officers have such dangerous jobs, it is not right to second guess decisions they make while on duty. And you somewhat disagreed and then drew an arrow towards strongly disagree with that. So knowing that the police are going to testify in this case and presumably against Mr. Chauvin, as well as Mr. Chauvin being a former police officer, can you evaluate the testimony of police officers for what it is? Meaning, would you assign more trustworthiness to a police officer simply by virtue of the fact that they're a police officer?
No.
Okay. But you somewhat disagree with the proposition of questioning decisions that police officers make, right?
Yes.
So are there circumstances wherein a police officer's decision-making is within bounds and should be questioned?
It shouldn't be.
Should.
I think that there's always room for questioning someone's reactions or behaviors. But there should probably be a process that goes through.
So like a more from an employment context or like a civilian process as opposed to a criminal process?
Could you read the
Sure.
question again to me?
There was a page where you were asked to, you were given several blanket statements.
Yes.
And you were asked to just say, I strongly agree, I sort of agree, all the way over to strongly disagree. And this statement is, because law enforcement officers have such dangerous jobs, it is not right to second guess the decisions they make on duty. And you somewhat disagreed to almost strongly disagreed with that.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess the question is, are there circumstances under which it is appropriate to second guess police officers?
Yes.
All right. And there are, you recognize that there's a spectrum of decisions that a police officer makes on a daily basis, right?
Yes.
And sometimes those decisions are calculated and thought out and take some time, and other times they're very fast, right?
Yes.
So let's assume that a police officer only pulled over black drivers. Do you think it would be okay to question why that police officer is making that decision?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's assume that a police officer was stealing drugs from the evidence room. Is it okay to question that officer's decision?
Yes.
Let's assume that a police officer is chasing a person down a dark alley. It's dark, can't see, and suddenly that person turns and faces the police officer and points something at him. Is it okay at that, and the officer shoots and kills that person? Should that be also examined, that officer's decision?
I think it should be examined. I think that it probably already is examined.
Okay, fair enough. And you would agree, you strongly agreed with the statement that police in your community make you feel safe.
Yes.
Right. So again, I mean, it's fine to have a healthy respect for police officers, but would you just believe police officers simply by virtue of the fact that they're a police officer?
No.
You were asked a series of questions about both Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter, and you had a very unfavorable opinion of Black Lives Matter. And you wrote, I do not agree with the guiding principles of the BLM movement. I do believe that the lives of people who happen to be black matter. So
Yes.
Can you explain, like, what do you mean by the guiding principles of the organization?
Well, that question in particular, I mean, if that question is asking me, do I agree with the statement that Black Lives Matter? I believe that that's a true statement. I don't share I don't agree with the founding principles and a lot of the positions that the organization Black Lives Matter holds to.
Okay. So, because obviously there are kind of different layers of the statement Black Lives Matter, right?
Yes.
And there is the general sentiment, Black Lives Matter, if I'm understanding this.
Mm-hmm.
There is the movement of Black Lives Matter, and then there's an organization of Black Lives Matter.
Okay.
And are you suggesting that you disagree with the organization, but are in agreement with basically the movement and notion that Black Lives Matter?
I agree with the notion that Black Lives Matter. I don't know how to parse out the difference between the movement and the organization.
Okay, fair enough. With respect to Blue Lives Matter, you had a neutral opinion, and you wrote, I don't know anything about that organization, but like my answer above, I believe that the lives of people who are police officers matter.
Correct.
So it's kind of the general sentiment that everybody matters.
Yes.
Okay. You have a relative who was a sheriff in the past?
Yes.
Some time ago?
Yes.
Is that person still alive and with us?
Yes.
Okay. So if you were a juror on this case, would you call your relative and say, hey, this is what they're telling me about how police officers are trained or what you're supposed to do. Can you confirm? Would you call that person for advice?
No.
Similarly, you have some friends who are in the medical profession in varying degrees. Would you call them for medical advice if you were a juror?
No.
I was interested in you were asked a series of questions and about the criminal justice system generally, and I was interested in one of your responses. You were asked, do you believe our criminal justice system works? Why or why not? And you wrote, I am not certain I understand this question properly, but I believe we have a system that, when it works correctly, is a fair and just system. I do understand that there could be instances when defendants do not receive adequate representation or sentencing guidelines may not be considered just. No system is perfect. I do think, in the main, that our justice system works. So the notion that when it doesn't work is because of an inadequacy of representation for individuals accused of crimes, is that where you think is a problem in the system?
I think that's one problem in the system.
Right. A reason to fully fund, say, the public defender's office, right?
Maybe.
Maybe. And then also just in terms of the disparity in sentencing, is that what you mean by the sentencing guidelines may not be considered just?
Yes.
Ultimately, you understand that I'm a lawyer, I represent my client, these are lawyers, they represent their client, and we're all trying to do the best we can do, right?
Yes.
Now, you were asked a question, the last question you were asked is, do you want to serve as a juror on this case? And you checked the box, not sure, right? And you wrote, this trial, like the events that led to it, will be well publicized and followed by many people. The unrest, burning, and looting following Mr. Floyd's death was troubling. It would be naive to think that similar things couldn't happen depending on the outcome of the trial. I am not sure if it is warranted, but I could have concerns about my privacy and safety. So that's
Yes.
that same notion that we started up our conversation with, right?
Yes.
Knowing what you know now, a couple months later, do you feel that you would be a fair and impartial juror in this case?
Yes.
Could you set aside your concerns about privacy and safety and listen to the evidence and judge this case based on the evidence?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I have a moment? We'll pass for cause, Your Honor.
Mr. Slusher.
Thank you, Your Honor. Juror number 87, good morning. I know you've been at it for a while and have been patient, and we thank you for that. I do want to follow up on a couple of your responses. And in one instance, I believe you responded on the survey that you believe somewhat agree with the proposition that discrimination is not as bad as the media says that it is. Do you recall that response?
I don't, but
Does that sound consistent with your belief that you somewhat agree that the media maybe overblows discrimination or exaggerates it?
yes.
Okay. So the two parts of that. First, what do you believe the media says about discrimination?
Well, by saying that I feel like they exaggerate it, I feel like the media exaggerates a lot of things. So I don't know that it would be necessarily more than other things that they exaggerate, but I feel like they may push it to a degree that stirs up controversy.
Okay.
And is that what you're looking for as an answer?
I'm just looking for your answer.
Well, I know
Yeah.
I meant to, did it answer your question?
It did. It did. But of course, now I'll have to follow up. But in that, why do you think the media does that?
I think they're not as unbiased as they always claim that they are. I guess that would be my answer.
Okay. And are there particular stories or instances that you can think of that you thought, the media is really kind of overplaying or overselling discrimination, or is it more of a generalized feeling you get from watching the news or reading the paper?
More of a generalized feeling.
Okay. Now, I'd like to compare that generalized feeling with some of your own real-life experience in how you would make that determination. So have you had conversations with close friends or family members who have experienced discrimination in their life?
Have I had them?
Yes.
Just in what areas? Any area?
Any area.
I'm sure I have, but I can't think of any off the top of my head.
How about taking it from the more general to the
Okay.
specific racial discrimination? Have you had conversations with friends of yours who've talked to you about racial discrimination that they may have experienced?
Yes.
And how have those conversations, I guess, compared with what you've seen on TV or read in the paper regarding the media's depiction of discrimination?
Well, you know, when you're speaking with one person, you're getting more of a personal story behind it. And so when you have those kinds of facts, it's a little easier to understand the discrimination than just a blanket discrimination story or something like that you might see.
So it sounds like you would be more inclined to believe something, a more personal story, than you would just kind of a generalized story that you would see in the media.
Yes.
Can you share with us, without revealing, you know, who this person would be, just what conversations have you had with friends who've experienced discrimination? What kind of discrimination have they shared with you?
Being looked at suspiciously, being categorized in certain ways. Being treated as somehow less than other people.
It's hard to hear those
Mhm.
experiences, isn't it?
It is.
You indicated in your survey that the criminal justice system, in response to the question whether the criminal justice system is biased against racial and ethnic minorities, you indicated that you somewhat disagree with that proposition. And I'd like you to share with us a little bit, you know, why you somewhat disagree with that proposition.
Well, I think when I answered that question, I was looking at it as how the system should work, and that we have a legal system that should work fairly for everyone. So I don't believe the system has been written in to be discriminatory.
As opposed to maybe in practice how it can work out for some people. So think of your friend who shared with you the view that from your friend's perception, they were put in a certain category or viewed suspiciously that maybe someone else in the same situation would not have been.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that can bleed into the criminal justice system? After all, we are all human beings here.
Sure. Yes.
So would you then agree that the criminal justice system can be biased against racial and ethnic minorities?
I believe it could be in instances, sure. I don't know that I would agree that it is as a blanket statement, but yes.
You indicated that you and a bit of a rarity have not seen the video that we were talking about earlier, but you did recall seeing an image from the video. Is that right?
I'm assuming it's from the video. It was just a still picture, and I think I saw it on a news website.
Do you recall what that still picture showed?
It showed police officer. I don't think I saw Mr. Floyd. I believe there was maybe a car on the edge of the picture. And that's all I can remember seeing.
Okay. You indicated that you had an uncle who worked for about 2 decades in a fairly large department. We won't identify which one it was. Is that right? As a deputy sheriff?
Yes, yes.
Are you close with your uncle?
Not super close.
Did you ever speak with your uncle about his line of work?
I'm sure I did over the years, yeah.
Has he ever shared stories with you about, just work-related stories?
Uh-huh, yes.
Can you recall any particular instances? Usually when an officer will share a story with somebody, it won't be about the time nothing happened, right?
Right. He served papers. So he'd shared a couple stories with me where people did not react well to being served papers. And one story of being, I believe he was bit in the jail by somebody in jail. But that's really all I can remember him talking about.
Sounds like a pretty difficult job in one's line of work. You don't expect to get bitten by people.
Sure.
And you also indicated that you do have a strong trust in police officers. Is that right?
Yes.
And you did state in response to counsel's question that you believe that you could evaluate the testimony of a police officer in the same light as a non-police officer.
Yes.
But I need to ask you, if you were, say, walking down the street and you were looking for a particular place, say the IDS Center, you didn't know where it was, and there were 2 people, and one was a police officer and one was a bystander. And the police officer told you that the IDS Center was to the left, and the bystander told you that the IDS Center was actually to the right. Which direction would you follow?
Probably the police officer's direction, I would assume. If he worked for the city, he would know.
And why is that? Why do you think you would follow the police officer's direction?
Because I guess I would assume that he would have had that question before, that he would have directed people in the city before.
And so based on that experience, you believe that the officer would be reliable, at least in terms of directions.
Yes.
Right. As opposed to the bystander, what would you question about the bystander's directions?
If I know nothing other than he's a bystander, I don't know that they were from the city. I don't know their background. I wouldn't assume that they knew more than the police officer knew.
I wanted to follow up with you. You indicated that your son did go to a protest.
Yes.
Did you talk to your son about going to the protest?
After, when I found out that he had gone.
This wasn't something he shared with you before?
No.
So, Mom, I'm going to a protest.
No, he did not.
Okay, what was your reaction when you found out that your son went to this protest, hadn't told you about it, found out after the fact?
He was on the 35W bridge when the truck came through. So my reaction was that I was very frightened when he called and told me that.
Okay. I recall that story. What did he tell you about it?
Well, he just told me he was on the bridge, that the truck came, that everybody ran. So
Were you upset with him for attending the protest in the first place? Or was it more that you were upset finding out, I would imagine, about the truck incident on the 35?
I was upset about the truck incident. I wasn't angry with him for going. I was more concerned for his safety.
Okay. One moment, Your Honor. Thank you very much, and thank you, ma'am, for your answers. Your Honor, the state will exercise a preemptory.
And Jury 87, you're excused from this panel, and so you won't have to serve on the jury. And in fact, you're excused from all jury service for now, unless we send you a summons in the future. You don't have to worry about being called about a different case during this term.
Okay.
So the deputy will escort you out and take some paperwork from you, and
Okay.
we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I've lost track. What number was that for the state? I'm sorry, it was what number strike?
It was his sixth strike.
Okay. So you have 4 left. Got it. Before we bring the next, is the next jury coming? Okay.
Do not want it.
Yeah, can you hold off? Just hold them in the hallway. I just want council to be aware of something. We good? Okay. Just so that council is aware, a variety of members of the media have been asking for more information about jurors or when it's going to be public, pressing us for a little more detail. And I've been emailing with the chief judge about that, and it's being communicated to the media, so I think you should be aware of what's being communicated to the media and even incorporate it in your voir dire if you wish. And that specifically is that nothing is going, we are currently releasing the race and the age decade of seated jurors. Everything else, because we have an anonymous jury, is remaining confidential. It is not being released publicly. When it will be released publicly is up to the court, and I have told Judge Barnett that I will order the release of the questionnaires and identifying information, a name, not an address, perhaps a single contact method, email, text, whatever, when I deem it safe to do so. That will be based mostly, as you all know, judges are very protective of our jurors. When I feel it is safe for the jurors, I will release their information, not before. And so if you want to incorporate that, that it's basically the court's decision to when to release such information, and the court will do so when it determines that it is safe to do so. So, because I know, Mr. Nelson, you've kind of tried to bring it up without saying what the court's going to do. I think if you can repeat that to the jurors, so, and of course that doesn't give anybody a date certain. It's my evaluation of the current situation, and at the time when a release is requested or on my own motion, it will be released when I deem it safe to do so. So, you may voir dire on that issue as well, using the court standard that has now been communicated to the media. All right, let's bring our next juror in, which is juror number 88. Good morning. If you could come right up here to this chair right next to me.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for your patience and waiting as well.
Of course.
And in fact, you were the last one from, I believe, yesterday's group.
That is correct.
So we made you come back.
Yeah.
All right. Before I turn it over to the attorneys, I'm going to take care of a few matters, ask you a few questions. First of all, I'm going to swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. If you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that you'll truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right, thank you. We have plexiglass between us, plexiglass in front of you. The lawyers also have plexiglass in front of them. And I am going to continue to wear a mask, even though I've had one of the shots. My point being, because of the level of protection we have, you may remove your mask when you're being examined, if it's more comfortable for you, or if you think you need to do so to speak clearly. But that's pretty much I'm leaving to you. And even if you take it off at some point, if you feel you want to put it back on, that's also okay. All right?
Okay.
Okay. First of all, you filled out a questionnaire, and thank you for doing that and getting it back to us. It gives us a lot of information to start with. Was everything true on that questionnaire?
Yes.
All right. Any changes or additions that you can think of at this point?
No.
Okay. We have found it's very common that because of the delay between when you filled it out and now, several months, that you, on reflection, may think, oh, I should have put this in, I should probably add that, or even that was not accurate, or I have an opinion and it's evolved. It's different than it was when I filled out the questionnaire. Both honest opinions, but just it's changed. My point is, you should feel comfortable in giving an answer that is different from the questionnaire. So feel free to do that. What we're looking for is, honest, candid answers. The lawyers are probably going to be directing your attention to specific questions, and they'll even read the question and your answer. Not to be disrespectful, and don't take it as confrontational. It's more to refresh your memory as to what your answer was.
Sure. I appreciate that.
And when you hear those questions, again, you might say, oh, it has changed. I do need to add something. That's perfectly understandable. All right, now the questionnaire also advises you not to read any newspaper articles, online articles, media advisory, or any media about this case. Basically, stay away from the news about this case. But, again, we understand it's been a few months since the questionnaire. You inadvertently may have been exposed to some information about this case or related cases or the parties, anything like that. Maybe see a headline that has some substance in it, or see a news report and you can't turn the channel quick enough. Has that happened to you? Have you been exposed to anything since the questionnaire till today?
I have.
Okay, tell me what you recall seeing.
While at home, I've seen things on the television, and it's just easier and quicker for me to get up and leave the room, and then my husband will either change the channel or mute it.
Okay.
But I heard something about a payout from the city.
And did you hear any specifics about the amount or anything like that?
I don't recall the amount, but I remember hearing millions.
Okay. When you filled out the questionnaire and submitted it, did you think at that time you could be a fair and impartial juror?
Yes.
Did that news that you found out about, did that move you off that position, that maybe you can no longer be impartial, or it doesn't have any effect on my partiality? I could be the same fair and impartial juror as before.
Yes, I think I can be.
Okay. Do you think what effect do you think that hearing about that settlement will have on you?
Well, my initial reaction, of course, was shock, surprise.
Mm-hmm.
But then I just, kind of said to myself, well, I didn't hear all of it, so I don't know all of it.
Okay.
And then I just kind of brushed it away.
Okay. That's a good analogy.
Mm.
Any other information you found out about this case? And we know it's all inadvertent because you can't avoid news about this to some
Right.
degree.
I do recall hearing something about some jurors, like about maybe last week, that they were up to maybe 4 jurors.
Okay.
But that's really about it.
Okay, so just the progress we're making here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The important thing to do here is not to say, I haven't read anything, I don't know anything about this case. I don't think there's anybody who knows nothing about this case.
Right.
There are varying degrees of knowledge. Some people have seen a lot, heard a lot, read a lot. Others have seen something but don't recall exactly. And the question is whether you've seen a lot or a little. Can you put all that aside and decide this case just on the evidence that you hear in the courtroom?
Yes, I believe so.
In fact, for example, getting back to that settlement, that's not going to be a part of this case because it was a different lawsuit, different parties, different laws, different issues.
Civil.
Yeah, that's an example of something you heard about, but you have to put aside because it's not going to be in this courtroom. Do you understand that?
I do.
Okay. Do you think you could do that as far as all you've heard about this case? Kind of put aside what you may have heard outside the courtroom, sweep it away, brush it away, and just focus on the evidence and follow the law that I give to you?
Yes.
And as you sit here right now, do you think you are an impartial juror?
Yes.
Okay, great. Did you recognize any witnesses that were on the witness list?
Yes.
Okay. What type of work do they do? Let's start with that.
I have no idea.
Okay. Is it just one person?
Yes.
Are they in law enforcement?
No.
Okay. Is this a neighbor, acquaintance?
An acquaintance.
Okay. Do you think if that person were to testify that you would treat them the same as any other witness who comes before us?
Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to order that we go off the audio. As you know, the audio is being broadcast. But I'd like to ask you a question that might be more specific and might identify yourself. So I don't want to do that.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
So I think what I'm going to do is order that under the rules that this would involve specific information that might identify the jurors, and so we'll go off audio at this time. All right, we are back on audio after a discussion with the juror. They have been excused by the court for cause. Reminder to the press that there's no reporting of the substance of an off the record, or rather off audio discussion. It is in essence an in-camera examination. So with that, let's take a 20-minute break. Let's come back at 10 minutes to 11. Thank you.
Crypto.com Visa card. A metal card. Powered by crypto. How about this?
All right, we're back on the record. Just to establish, the court did excuse the last juror for cause. It is apparent that this juror was acquainted with one of the witnesses in this case, who is a central person in the state's case and would be testifying about fairly sensitive material. I think her acquaintance, which is close enough for her to bring it up, and the court evaluated it, thought that it was too close a connection to a central witness that a cause challenge would be appropriate, or a cause excusal would be appropriate. I would note that given the nature of the witness's testimony who's going to be testifying, that it could affect the witness's testimony in that they look out and they see an acquaintance who they know, and it would be, I'm sure, uncomfortable for them first to share it in front of a jury, but then a jury that it contains someone they know. So for all those reasons, the court, on its own motion, granted the cause challenge. And we'll move to the next group, which is a group advisory before we begin. Anything else for the record, though? Mr. Larson, you want to check in the hallway and see if, you'll know what I mean. All right, take any seat that's available. All right, good morning. Be seated. First of all, can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Great. And when I ask some questions, there may be yes or no. If it's yes, raise your hand in response. Well, first of all, my name is Pete Cahill, and I'm one of the judges of the district court. And you have been summoned as potential jurors in the case of State of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, which is a criminal case related to the death of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020. A person charged with a crime has a right to a fair trial before an impartial judge and an impartial jury. In order to make sure that the jurors who are selected are impartial, the law provides that the court and the attorneys for the parties may ask questions, which must be answered under oath. First, thank you for filling out and returning the questionnaire that was mailed to you. Your contribution to the important and serious matter at hand is best assured by continuing to provide full and complete answers to the questions that you're going to be asked today. Those questions will follow up on issues from the questionnaire, but also other topics. Now, after the questioning is over, the attorneys will have the right to excuse some of you from service on this jury, and I may excuse others of you for what is called cause. In either case, it does not mean that you are not a fair person, and you should not take offense in being excused. Also ask that you not take any offense at any question that might be asked. We must pry, to some extent, in order to explore opinions you might hold and to discuss experiences that you've had that might affect your ability to serve in this case. Well, the defendant, Mr. Chauvin, has been charged with murder in the second degree and manslaughter in the second degree. In the normal course of a trial, charges may be added or subtracted from that, but those are the charges as it stands. To the charges, the defendant has entered a plea of not guilty, which is a denial of each and every material allegation in the charges. I'm now going to have the participants introduce themselves to you. The question being, do you have an acquaintance or a friendship with any of these people, or even a professional relationship? So, first for the state.
Good morning. My name is Steve Slisher, and I represent the state of Minnesota.
Hello, my name is Christina Marinakis, and I'm assistant with the prosecution.
Joshua Larson, also representing the state of Minnesota.
Good morning, Erin Eldridge for the state of Minnesota.
And Mr. Nelson, if you could introduce your client and yourself.
Morning, my name is Eric Nelson, along with Christina Boss. We represent the defendant, Derek Scholl.
Anybody recognize, have a relationship with anybody who's introduced themselves? Does anybody recognize, have a relationship with somebody who is in the courtroom other than those who have introduced themselves? All right, thank you. Other members of the Office of the Minnesota Attorney General might also be appearing in this case. Does anybody know Attorney General Keith Ellison, Jerry Blackwell, or anyone else who works for the Office of the Minnesota Attorney General? Okay, no hands, thank you. Now, you have been given a copy of a list of potential witnesses. Please review it before you are questioned individually. The question is going to be if you know anyone on that list. Now, one of the things the attorneys may not do during jury selection is to instruct you on the law. But I do want you to be aware of some of the basic concepts that apply in all criminal cases, so that you may keep them in mind as you answer the court's and the attorney's questions. So I will instruct you as follows. First, the charges against the defendant are not evidence, and they create no inference of guilt. No member of this jury should in any way permit himself or herself to be prejudiced against the defendant because a charge has been made or because he has been placed on trial. The defendant is presumed innocent of the charges made against him, and in order for you to find the defendant guilty, the state must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant does not have to prove his innocence. The presumption of innocence remains with the defendant throughout the trial, unless and until he has been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt according to the law and the evidence admitted at trial. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is such proof as ordinarily prudent men and women would act upon in their most important affairs. A reasonable doubt is a doubt based upon reason and common sense. It does not mean a fanciful or capricious doubt, nor does it mean beyond all possibility of doubt. If you serve on this jury, you and your fellow jurors will be the sole judges of whether a witness is to be believed and of the weight to be given a witness's testimony. There are no hard and fast rules to guide you in this respect. In determining believability and weight of testimony, jurors may take into consideration the witness's interest or lack of interest in the outcome of the case, relationship to the parties, ability and opportunity to know, remember, and relate the facts, their manner, their age and experience, their frankness and sincerity, or the lack thereof, the reasonableness or the unreasonableness of their testimony in light of all the other evidence in the case, and any other factors that bear on believability and weight. If on this jury, you should rely in the last analysis upon your own experience, good judgment, and common sense. Now, there are certain things you should not do during jury selection. You are not investigators. You are not to go out to do any looking, and you are not to ask people about this matter. You are not to use the internet to look for information about this case or about the law. Above all, you must not talk to anyone who is involved, the lawyers, witnesses, or spectators. They know that it would be improper to contact you except through the normal selection process, and they will confine themselves to a brief greeting. So please do not be offended if the attorneys, witnesses, or spectators do not speak to you. During the selection process, your family and friends will be curious as to what you are doing. You may tell them you are on a panel of potential jurors in a criminal case, and that is all you should tell them. Since that is all you should tell family and friends, that is all you should tell the general public. So please, during these proceedings, please refrain from using Facebook, Twitter, or other social media to announce that you are a potential juror or to comment on this trial. You may access those social media tools, hopefully avoiding any news coverage that might be in those media tools. But please do not publish any information about this case or your thoughts about this case. You do not have to stay away from people and refuse to speak to them. Do whatever you wish, but do not talk about this case, and do not talk at all to anyone involved in it. Because of the nature of the charges, this case is receiving media coverage. Do not read about this case in the newspaper or online or in your social media, and do not listen to news about it on radio or television. Now, this trial, including jury selection, is being televised, but no video of you or other jurors, any other juror, will be taken at any time, now or during trial if you are selected. Also, your name will not be used in the courtroom. You will only be referred to by your random number to respect your privacy. The audio of anything you say will be broadcast, unless we need to discuss something deeply personal or extremely sensitive or embarrassing, and I specifically order the audio to not be broadcast. And you might hear me, unfortunately, use one of our legal phrases for it as an in-camera examination. That does not mean cameras. It means in private. That's the problem when we use legal jargon sometimes. So if you hear me say that phrase, you're not going on camera. So please understand that. As I said, generally your audio will be broadcast, but if there is anything extremely sensitive, embarrassing, deeply personal, or, in this case, if it would tend to identify you, we will go off audio so that the only people who can hear the audio are the people who are in this room. In that case, as I said, you'll still have to answer questions and it will still be part of the record, but without audio or video broadcast. All right, with the exception of juror number 89, check my notes, who will remain. The other juror will go back with the deputy to the other courtroom to wait. Feel free to use all the hand sanitizer you want. All right. I'm going to put my mask back on and ask juror number 89 to come on up here to the witness stand. Good morning. Have a seat. Before we begin, I'm going to swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. So raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
Okay. All right. It looks like you are able to project your voice, so I'm not concerned about picking up your voice, but if you could just move a little closer. We have plexiglass in front of you, between us, and also the lawyers have their own plexiglass screen in front of them. I'm going to continue to wear my mask, but the point being, you can take yours off.
Thank you.
If at any time you want to put it back on, feel free. I leave the mask or unmask entirely to you. These precautions should be enough if you are unmasked. Okay. A few questions I have before I turn it over to the attorneys. First of all, you filled out the questionnaire, and thank you for doing so. A lot of good information for us to start with. Is everything on the questionnaire true?
Yes.
Okay. Any changes or additions to the questionnaire?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of a general question. When the attorneys are asking you questions, it may prompt a memory, and you may want to add something that wasn't on the questionnaire.
Okay.
And we understand it was couple months ago that you filled out the questionnaire. Since then, you, in reflection, you may realize there's something you should have added, or something was inaccurate, or even your opinion that you held is now evolved in some way. Regardless, the point being, I want you to be comfortable giving an answer, if it's honest, that is different or additional to the questionnaire. Okay?
Okay.
You were not supposed to read any articles. The questionnaire advised you to avoid the media about this case. We recognize a couple things. It's been a couple months and the news coverage has been extensive, even as recently as this week and last week. And so the question I have for you is, did you inadvertently, despite your best efforts, inadvertently get exposed to any news coverage? A headline, a blurb on the TV news before you could leave the room? Anything like that?
Yes.
Yeah, what did you learn?
The city of Minneapolis settlement.
Okay.
I heard that on the headline radio.
Okay, and what details did you learn? Any amounts? Or?
The amount.
Okay, what do you recall it to be?
27 million.
All right. Anything else you know about the settlement other than there was a settlement for $27 million?
No.
Okay. When you filled out the questionnaire, I think you think I know this by now. I think it was question 10 in the first part. Asked you if you could be a fair and impartial jury, and you said yes. That was when you filled out the questionnaire. Has any of the news you've heard, like even in addition to that settlement discussion, has that moved you in any way off of being impartial?
I don't think so.
Okay, tell me about that. What effect do you think it would have on you, if any?
Boy. I don't know. I want to consider all sides.
Okay.
I know I've turned off the radio or television,
Okay.
change of channels when any news stories come, but I don't know how it. I'm doing my best to avoid it.
Oh yeah,
So-
and we know everybody has. It's almost impossible.
Right.
And so every juror I think who's come in has said since they filled out the questionnaire they've been exposed to some inadvertently. It's
Right.
not, despite your best efforts. We understand that. The question is, do you think that hearing about, for example, that settlement or any other fact, do you think that's going to bias you in some way? And maybe you're here, you're fair and impartial, you're kind of neutral in the middle. Did that move the needle at all that you might be pushed towards one side or the other?
I don't think so.
Okay. And the attorneys will probably follow up on that. But I'm just essentially going to advise you that's not going to be in evidence. It's a different case, different parties, different legal issues, different laws that apply. Can you accept that?
Yes.
Okay. And not just settlement, generally everything you've heard about, even before you filled out the questionnaire and knew that you might be a juror in this case, can you put everything you've heard before today aside if you're a juror and decide the case just on what you hear in the courtroom and to decide it according to the laws I give it to you?
I believe I can.
Okay, great. I'll shift to an easier question. Did you recognize any witnesses that are on the witness list?
I did not.
Okay. We estimate that this trial will be 4 weeks once we start, and then deliberation after that, or as part of the 4 weeks. As you've already seen, there can be a little delay every now and then that we don't anticipate. Can you make that time frame work for your personal, professional life?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions for me before I turn you over to the attorneys?
I don't think so.
All right. Then with regard to the juror number 89, Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience. We know things do get a little delayed here and there. So, few questions I'm going to ask you initially, just kind of general questions, get to know you, kind of how you think a little bit. And then I want to follow up with some of your responses to the questionnaire. Again, we know it was a couple months ago you filled it out, so we're not trying to trick you what you wrote, okay?
Yes.
I think only one person has actually kept a copy of it so far.
Okay.
Let's assume you and I met under a different circumstance. We're at some sort of a social event, and we're engaged in conversation. Our first conversation, what are a couple things I learn about you during that conversation?
I'm a nurse. I live alone.
Okay. What do you like to do in your spare time?
Oh, I read, I watch television, I visit my nieces and nephews.
Great. And you live here in the cities generally?
In Edina.
All right. If you you obviously had heard about this case before you got your jury summons, right?
Yes.
And you had certain knowledge, or you had learned things from the news, right?
Yes.
Maybe talk to friends about it, form some opinions, etc. But then you learned, because you received this packet, that you're a potential juror in this case. So what was your initial reaction to learning that you were going to be a potential juror in this case?
Ambivalence. It's a big case with the media, and I think it'll have a lot of repercussions on a lot of lives. So, not not real excited about it. So,
Okay, fair enough. Well, let me ask you, did you have concerns about your personal or physical safety? Did you have concerns about COVID? Did you?
maybe safety after the trial
Okay.
would be my concern.
Well, let me ask you, when you got to the government center, were you here yesterday?
I was not.
Okay, my days are kind of running together here. So, when you got to the government center this morning and you kind of saw the state of things down here, what was your reaction to that?
I didn't really see much. I drove around the block a number of times
Okay.
trying to find the parking entrance, but
Okay.
I don't know, insecurity coming in, you know.
Right. I mean, it's not normal to see Humvees and machine guns downtown Minneapolis.
I did not see that.
Oh,
So.
you didn't? Okay.
No.
All right. Well, does the security that they have installed, does that make you feel better about your personal safety during the trial? Ambivalent? Less safe?
I feel safe.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. When the judge this afternoon or this morning told you that we're doing what we can to protect your anonymity, how did that make you feel?
Reassured.
Okay. Now, ultimately, at some point, your name may be released to the public. Do you understand that?
Yes.
And ultimately, we don't know when that will be, but it will be when the court feels that it's safe to do so. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Does that make you feel better?
Kind of.
Okay. Why only kind of?
Yeah, I don't know how comfortable I am with my name being out there afterwards.
Okay. I mean, even if it's a long time down the road?
Well, maybe, but I've seen Dateline where they've interviewed jurors and stuff, and I wouldn't want any part of that.
Okay. So, you can obviously choose to talk to people or not
Correct.
talk to people, but
Correct.
you understand that at
Yes.
some point, I guess let's put it this way. If you were selected as a juror, right, and you're tasked with rendering a verdict in this case, would your concerns about your anonymity, would it influence your decision-making process?
I don't think so.
Would you be more inclined to vote one way or another based on what you perceive the public reaction would be to that verdict?
No.
Okay, good. Now, again, I understand you're a nurse, and we don't want you to identify where you work, or the type of nursing you do. But I'm assuming in the course of your professional career or in the course of your personal life, at some point you have been called upon to resolve conflict between two or more people, right?
Yes.
How do you generally approach the resolution of conflict?
I listen to each side and try and restate what I've heard, and come up with a solution.
Okay,
So,
fair enough. Obviously, this case may involve quite a few numbers of conflict, right?
yes.
There's obviously the big conflict between Mr. Chauvin and the state of Minnesota. That's one thing you'll have to resolve. There may be conflicts that emerge in the jury room, or there may be conflict between testimony of two witnesses. Right? So I just kind of want to talk about those.
Okay.
Ultimately, in terms of the big context or the big conflict, are you the type of, or would you be able to pay attention to the evidence as it's presented in court, decide this case based on the evidence alone, and kind of ignore everything else that you've heard from before?
I believe I could.
All right. I have to press you a little bit on
Yes.
that. Can you, or do you simply believe you can?
I can.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, in terms of, imagine you're in the jury room, and there's conflict that emerges between two groups of jurors, right? And you're not really sure what you think yet, right, about whatever the issue may be. It's hard to put it in the abstract, obviously, but so you have two groups that are different. How do you approach the resolution of that kind of contact to try to conflict to try to build consensus?
Well, if I'm on one side versus another, of course I'll state why I believe this. And if I'm in the middle and not undecided, I would want to listen to both sides.
Okay. You kind of see
Hey.
what pieces of information
They're pulling as important, or
Okay.
as relatable.
Do you think is it a remarkably different analysis if you're undecided and kind of neutral on the issue versus having a position or being involved in the conflict yourself? So let me put it in I know it's very broad and abstract way to ask a question. Let's assume that you have not made up your mind about a particular issue in this case.
Okay.
And what you're saying is you're going to listen to these two sides, you're going to hear both sides, and then you're going to use that information to form your own opinion in one hand. Is the analysis different if you've already made up your mind, right? If you say, I know what I think about this issue, do you approach that differently?
I think so.
How so?
I'd probably give more weight to my opinion than somebody else's.
Okay. So are you the type of person that will simply agree with someone else just to build consensus and get this over with?
No.
Okay. Are you willing to re-examine your own opinions and listen to the other side?
Yes.
Good. Now, again, within the context of conflict in the case, you may have two witnesses that are observing the same event, and they may perceive that event to be completely different, right? How do you resolve that type of conflict in terms of, should we believe this person's perception, or should we believe that person's perception?
Well, and with my background of work, I know everybody has different perceptions of seeing the same event. I pray have to weigh each one and decide, if they're very conflicting, why that is.
Okay. And so, I mean, what tools do you bring to that analysis? I mean, do you look at what other people may say? Do you look at what other evidence there may be? Right? I mean, how like, as a way of explaining.
Yeah, definitely. I would say evidence, notes made during questioning.
Okay, fair enough. Can you think of a situation in your life where you were 100% certain about something, only later to learn you were wrong?
Yes.
Okay. How do you react to that type of a situation?
Well, try and admit that I was wrong.
Okay. Do you take that experience and apply it to future
Yeah.
events, or
Yes.
do you kind of blow it off?
No, definitely don't jump to conclusions.
Okay, great. Now, again, your role, you would be considered what's called a judge of the facts, and your job is to decide what happened here in this particular case, right? And at the end of the case, the judge is going to present you with the rules of law that you need to apply. And you may read those rules and you may disagree. You may think that the judge is wrong, or you may think that the law should be changed, right? Can you follow the law as the judge gives it to you, even if you disagree with the judge, or you think the law should be changed?
Yes, that's the law.
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to follow up with just a few questions on your questionnaire. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to fill this out. Your answers were very thorough, and we all appreciate that. There's a series of questions and references to a video that you may have seen, and I think you said 4 or 5 times, something like that. There were several videos that were released publicly. There's what we refer to as a bystander video, there are body-worn cameras, and there were some surveillance videos that were released. Which videos or videos do you think you've seen?
I don't know, probably bystander
Okay,
on the news.
all right. It appeared to be someone standing off to the side?
Behind, behind the police car.
Okay. And did you watch that video in its entirety?
No, I did not.
Are you, when you say you saw it 4 to 5 times, are you referring to bits
Pieces.
Was that presented in the media? Or did you just see, like, scrolling through Facebook?
Yeah, no, it would have been on television.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to try not to talk over each other.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because it makes it hard for the court to get the record out.
Thank you.
And it's a normal part of conversation when we're out on the street, but we have to be a little more formal here. So, Mr. Nelson, if you would.
Thank you, Your Honor. So that video that you're referencing, you saw bits and pieces of it on the news a few times,
Yes.
right? But you never went onto the internet, downloaded the whole video, and watched it from start to finish?
No, I did not.
Okay. You were asked to recite what you recall from hearing about this case on the questionnaire. I have a few questions about that. You understand that the police were called to a store, a grocery store is how you describe it, and that the police attempted to arrest or place Mr. Floyd in the back of a police car. He resisted, citing claustrophobia, and ended up on the ground beside the police car. Right. Do you remember that, seeing that in that video, or did you just hear about that in the news? How did you learn that information?
Yeah, I don't remember seeing that. Probably heard it through the news on TV.
Okay. Because you're right, this is what I know from the video that was broadcast around the world. So I just want to, maybe you did see other videos, or you just heard discussion of other videos?
Probably discussion. I don't remember seeing how he got on the ground.
Okay. And then you wrote that the police continued to restrain George Floyd in this manner, meaning with his, I believe you said, officers were kneeling on his body. You said police continued to restrain George Floyd in this manner for 7 or 8 minutes until he was no longer conscious and or moving. I do not know what happened to George Floyd after he was no longer conscious or alive. Fair statement of what you recall from this?
Yes.
All right. Being a nurse, right, do you think that you would view that type of evidence differently than an average citizen?
Probably.
Someone who doesn't have medical training?
Probably.
How do you think your professional background impacts or influences how you may look at video evidence or medical evidence?
I recognize the amount of time that a person can be without air before they're unconscious.
So if there's conflict with respect to why that person may be lacking air, do you think that you would draw, and you hear two conflicting opinions about that, right? Do you think you would be, do you think your personal training may bias or impact how you listen to medical evidence? Right? If one witness comes in and says the human body can withstand not having oxygen for a half an hour, right? And another one comes in and says, no, human body needs air every 3 seconds, right? Or, some kind of something to be wrong based on your training.
Right.
You would obviously draw upon your own personal knowledge in that instance, right?
Yes.
But let's assume that it's a closer question between two people, right? Between two medical experts. Do you think you would, your personal training would impact how you, or the credibility you assess to those people, those two witnesses?
Yes.
Okay. Now, one of the things you're told is you have to set aside, we all have our personal experiences, right?
Yes.
And you are required to judge this case based exclusively on the evidence that's presented in court. So how do you set aside your personal training, your personal knowledge, and judge the case on the facts as presented in court in that instance?
I'd have to weigh what the expert would say,
Okay.
and then how the judge directs to follow
Okay.
the law.
You were asked a series of questions about your general impression of both Mr. Chauvin as well as Mr. Floyd, and you, with respect to both, you had a neutral opinion as to both.
Yes.
Do you recall that? In terms of Mr. Chauvin, you wrote, "I am not sure what training the defendants had for this kind of event. I don't know who was in charge, how the whole encounter started, or what frame of mind they were in." Right?
Right.
Can you just kind of, I mean, what in your opinion, sitting here now, how do those things impact your impression of Mr. Chauvin?
Well, I suppose based on the training that's given, that would tell me if he was utilizing the training given.
Okay.
His knowledge of the training given.
Fair enough.
So,
And in terms of Mr. Floyd, you wrote, "Did George Floyd resist? Did he cooperate initially? Was George Floyd armed?" Right?
Right.
So what I'm gathering is that you think that there's potentially more to this story than what you may have seen on the news. Is that a fair assessment?
yes, I don't know the whole story.
Okay.
Yes.
And again, the story has to be based, or the verdict, I should say, has to be based on the evidence that's presented in court. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And ultimately, you are asked whether, no matter what you have heard, no matter what opinions you might have formed, can you put all of that aside and decide this case only on the evidence you receive in court, follow the law, and decide the case in a fair and impartial manner? And your answer was?
Yes.
You indicated that you had talked with your friends or family members about the case, or potentially posted on social media. Let me ask you, did you ever post anything about this case on social media?
I have not.
So you've had conversations with friends and coworkers and things of that nature.
Family, yeah.
And the question, or what opinions you may have expressed, you said, "How could police kneel on someone until dead? Was kneeling on him appropriate?" So are you asking these questions in the abstract, or do you have an opinion that this was too long to kneel on someone?
I suppose probably asking abstractly, but
Well, let me ask you more concretely then. Have you formed an opinion as to the actions of Mr. Chauvin?
I have not.
So whether you're asking the question of how could it be this long, right?
Okay.
Is that indicative of an opinion that you think it was too long?
Sounds like it, yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I have to take you at face value. I don't want to put words in your mouth, right? I'm trying to see what's
I
in your-
suppose knowing that Mr. Floyd died, I would say yes, it was too long.
Okay. So have you formed an opinion as to Mr. Floyd's cause of death?
I don't know. No, I don't think I have.
Okay. Do you have an opinion as to have you formed an opinion as to who is responsible for Mr. Floyd's death?
I have not.
I just want to remind you of one thing that was listed in the questionnaire is that if there's anything that you want to speak about privately, we have the ability to shut off and do that in-camera review.
Okay.
And there are a few things that you wrote in here that I think are personal. I don't know. Some people are comfortable talking about contacts with police and family members and things publicly, and others aren't. So I have a question. There's some questions about some of your past experiences. Would you prefer that we do that privately, or are you comfortable answering them on the record over the air? It's up to you.
Privately.
I'll take that as private.
Privately.
Yeah,
please.
I agree, Your Honor.
All right, we will, finding that these are deeply personal matters, under the rule, I'm going to order that the audio be turned off for broadcast purposes. topic, so we are back on audio. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, in the questionnaire, you were asked a series of questions about, there were a series of these kind of broad blanket statements, and you were asked to agree or disagree, essentially, or rank your opinion on these statements. I'd like to follow up. I know that they're very broad and there may be nuance to answers, but I wanted to follow up on a couple of these. There is a question that says, discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it out to be. That's a weird statement, so I'll read it again. Discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it out to be. And you somewhat disagreed with that. Why would you somewhat disagree?
I don't know that the media makes it as bad as it seems to me.
Okay. So that was
I disagree with the whole, the statement that the media makes it worse. I don't agree with that.
Right, because the next statement is blacks and other minorities do not receive equal treatment as whites in the criminal justice system, and you strongly agreed with that.
Yes, I do.
So, in terms of your opinion, right? I mean, you understand that, or it's your belief that discrimination exists.
Yes.
And that it's bad.
Yes.
And that as a result of that discrimination, black and other minorities do not receive equal treatment. You would agree with that?
Yes.
All right. So the question becomes based on that opinion, right? Is that going to affect your judgment of this case? If this case is not about race at all, for example, right? And it's a question of police practice and cause of death, are you going to, is your judgment going to be impacted by your opinions as to discrimination in this?
No.
So if a police officer has an interaction with a minority, does that automatically make it discrimination, I guess?
No. No.
All right. You also, I think, have a fairly healthy respect for law enforcement. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
The question is presented, or the statement is presented, police in my community make me feel safe, and you strongly agree with that.
Yes.
Right? There's a statement, a similar statement that says, I do not trust the police, and you somewhat disagree with that. Is there?
I don't distrust the police.
Okay.
Is that what?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the police make you feel safe, and you strongly agree with that.
Right.
But when it says, I don't trust the police, you don't strongly disagree. You somewhat disagree. So I'm asking, I guess, what is it that gives you some reservation to say, I don't trust the police?
They're human.
Okay, fair enough. Which, my last question on these statements, there's a statement that says, because law enforcement officers have such dangerous jobs, it is not right to second-guess decisions they make while on duty, and you somewhat disagree with that. So would you agree that converse is true, that there are circumstances wherein police decision-making needs to be examined?
Yes.
If a person testifies and they're a police officer, do you give their testimony more weight simply by virtue of the fact that they're a police officer?
No.
I think you said they're all human, right? Or we're
yes,
all human.
Exactly.
You indicated, or you were asked a series of questions about both Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. Your opinion about the statement Black Lives Matter is somewhat favorable, and your opinion as to the Blue Lives Matter is somewhat unfavorable. So I'll read to you what you wrote. With respect to Black Lives Matter, you wrote, I believe that black lives do matter, and that this group is trying to highlight the injustices done to black people, especially for just being black. You stand by that proposition?
Yes.
Again, I mean, knowing that this case if I were to say this case is not about race, right?
Right.
Can you set aside your perception of the Black Lives Matter or the Blue Lives Matter and judge the case based on the
its
evidence?
merit. Yes.
Great. Finally, ma'am, you were asked, do you want to serve as a juror in this case? You checked the box, not sure, and you wrote, this is an important case. The decision made by the jury will have a national consequence that is a heavy weight to carry no matter the outcome. So let me ask you, can you envision a situation, or can you envision the very real possibility that your verdict may be not guilty?
Yes.
Can you likewise envision a scenario where your verdict would be guilty?
Yes.
Can you apply the presumption of innocence?
Yes.
Will you?
Yes, I will.
So, to put it in another way, this is, pay is terrible, right? To be a juror, it's a hard job. It requires a lot of attention. Why should you be a juror on this case?
I think I can be impartial and listen to instructions and go with what I'm given and ignore the outside stuff.
Fair enough. If I may have a moment, Your Honor.
You may.
I'm sorry, I just have a few more questions for you. Again, without identifying the location of where you work, do you work in an emergency room, or have you ever worked in an emergency room?
No.
Okay. So have you ever been in a situation as a registered nurse where you are engaged in resuscitative efforts?
Yes.
Okay. And again, do you think that those experiences may impact how you view what was done in this particular case?
And that we all use our life experiences to make judgments.
So let's there was that question about questioning police decision making, right?
Yes.
In that those events where you're attempting to resuscitate someone, it's a hectic scene, right?
It is, yes.
And a lot of split-second decisions are made,
Yes.
right? Would you be second-guessing resuscitative efforts if you're watching them, happen? Do you think it's fair to second-guess resuscitative efforts or doctors' decisions?
Not as it's happening.
after the fact?
We debrief after Code Blues.
Okay.
So then we look at what went wrong, what went right.
Okay. Fair enough. If I may have just another moment. Sorry, Your Honor, it's just one of those issues. All right, imagine you're in the deliberation room, right? And the subject of the medical stuff comes up, of medical issues come up. Do you go to the jurors and say, I'm a nurse, I know better, this is what we need to do, if you think that the jurors are wrong?
I guess it would depend on my instructions of what we can consider.
Nelson, would you mind if I jump in?
No, please.
I think what we're trying to get at is, let's go back to the concept of a fair trial, which is kind of a hard to define term.
Right.
But one of the elements of a fair trial is that we're all working off the same script. In other words, the lawyers know what it is you're considering, both for the state and for the defense. And so you can't be the expert witness in the jury room because no one knows what you're saying as far as that goes. When you're providing essentially what would be described as evidence as opposed to evaluation of evidence that is there, you might understand the terminology that they use more readily than another juror. But can you avoid being the expert witness in the jury room?
I'm not a witness, so
Okay.
As you're explaining it, yes.
So does that make some sense? That,
Yes.
And you can see why
Yes.
both sides might have a concern.
Right.
They want to know what the evidence is that you're considering, and you cannot add to the evidence with your own expert opinion.
I understand. Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right.
Can you do that?
Can I do that? Yes.
Okay. One more moment.
Mr. Slisher, give me a quick moment. You can go to the lectern. I just have to talk to Mr. Schaefer.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon now.
Good afternoon.
You've been in the nursing field for a long time, and without identifying any particular facilities you worked at, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the different types of nursing positions you've held through the years. Perhaps starting with the most recent one that you hold now. What is your job like?
Busy, very busy. I work with ventilated patients, and with COVID, there's a lot of people coming to us on ventilators. Nursing care's busy.
As you look around the courtroom, you see the measures that they've taken to safeguard us during this COVID period. Are you satisfied with these measures?
Yes.
Do you think they're too far or more than necessary?
Well, I think they're about right.
Okay. What about the job you had before you were focusing on the patient ventilation?
It was with cardiac care.
Okay.
So, an intensive care kind of setting. So, I don't know what you want to know about it, but
Well, what do you do as a cardiac care nurse?
take care of patients, keep them alive. There's different treatments. I don't know if they've had a heart attack. Sometimes there's a hypothermia treatment. There's a balloon pump treatment. There's different ways of going. We get them better so they can get out of the ICU.
As an RN, you dispense medication,
Yes. Yes.
including controlled substances.
Yes.
And can you describe some of the measures that are in place to make sure that controlled substances go to the patient and not anywhere else?
Yes. We dispense from a machine and have a password, and so there's a internal record of any med you take out. There's witnesses to waste if you don't give a full dose of a controlled substance.
Do you believe that the focus that your hospital has placed on issues regarding opiates has increased over the years?
That we're using opiates more? Is that
The
what
potential
you're-
diversion of opiates, I guess, is what.
Well, it's been brought to our attention recently. I think someone was dismissed for that. So yeah, they're starting to focus on that.
Have you come across a number of opiate addicted patients in your practice?
Yes.
Do you think that opiate addiction is more prevalent than it was, say, when you started nursing back in, was it 2003 approximately?
1994 is when I started nursing.
Okay, you must have been a nurse before you were an RN then.
Yes.
Okay.
So.
Did you start as an LPN? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, probably more. I see more opiate addicted patients now.
Do you attribute opiate addiction to any particular group or type of person, or have you found in your practice it can be
It can be anybody. Yes.
You obviously know how to perform CPR.
Yes.
Have you ever been in a situation where you're not at your job, where you've had to render aid to somebody, be it CPR or some other type of emergency aid beyond applying a Band-Aid?
I have not.
What would you do in a circumstance in which you came upon an incident and you thought that somebody needed your help? Would you jump in to help?
Yes, I would.
Why is that?
That's what I do. And part of being human, I have that compassion. If it were me, I'd want somebody to step up and try and help.
Do you feel that you have any other special obligation given your training?
As a nurse, I feel obligated to help someone who needs medical assistance, yes.
On the questionnaire, when you were discussing general impressions of the defendants, you remarked that you weren't sure what kind of training the defendants had for this type of event. Can you tell me what would you be interested in learning about what kind of training a defendant may have, a police officer may have?
Probably de-escalation and restraining.
You also indicated that you would want to know whether or not George Floyd was armed.
I think that would affect the officer's decision on how to act, yes.
You indicated that you somewhat disagree with the notion of defunding the Minneapolis Police Department. Can you tell me why that is?
Well, I don't want their finances taken away. I believe the police have a job to do, and for the most part, it gets done. So they need money for that. And to take money away would probably make less police available.
And that would not improve the situation.
Right.
Okay. All right. I appreciate your answers to my questions today. If you may give me a moment, Your Honor. Thank you. The state passes for cause.
All right, juror number 89, you will serve on this jury. And so we're going to, we'll let that sink in. We're going to have you come back on March 29th at 9 a.m. That's when we're going to start the trial. But make sure you answer any phone calls or communications from the court, because as you've already seen, sometimes we end up with some delays, and that's possible. We're pretty confident in that start time. So if nothing else, we will call simply to remind you that we're set to go on that date and time. Okay. In the meantime, we started by telling people to avoid any media coverage about this case. The more you can avoid the news generally, because it's so prevalent. If you could do that, that'd be appreciated.
Okay.
You can go, the deputy's going to take some paperwork from you, but also give you some further instructions, and then we'll see you on March 29th.
Thank you.
All right, it's almost 12:15. We're going to take our noon break. Let's try and reconvene at 1:15. We might not start till 1:30, but let's give it a shot. We still have one juror from the morning who Mr. Schaefer has advised that he's on his lunch break, and we've given them lunch. So let's come back 1:15, hopefully with that juror, and then we'll move to the afternoon group. All right, thank you.